Nora Bateson is an award-winning filmmaker, research designer, writer, educator, international lecturer, as well as president of the International Bateson Institute, based in Sweden and USA. She is the creator of the warm data theory and practices. Her first book, Small Arcs of Larger Circles, released in 2016, is a revolutionary personal approach to the study of systems and complexity. It is our pleasure today to have Nora Bateson in our podcast, and be prepared for an amazing conversation that not just blew our minds away, but completely blew whatever we were expecting to cover. So it's a fun ride. Please join us.
Nora, welcome to the Mastery Effect podcast. We're excited to have you here. I would like to have you introduce yourself, something about you personally, professionally.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's wonderful to meet you and to join you in this project. Let's see. I think this is such an interesting thing that we have this process of asking for introductions, and how this is the perfect jumping off place to recognize how difficult it is in the current culture of this kind of communication and professionalism to not just talk about the systems and the complexity, but to live within them. And the second I would try to introduce myself, I would immediately start reaching for reductionist descriptions of who I am. And we would go ahead with that without noticing that that was what was happening. And I could say, oh, I have lived my life working with systems and complexity, and I developed the warm data theory and practice, and I am the president of the Bateson Institute, and blah, blah, blah. I've written the following books and made films and yada, yada. But that is actually not an introduction to who I am. And I think if I'm introducing you to who I am, one of the interesting things that I have to start to explore right away is, who am I with you? Right? Immediately we're in a relational process, because who I am with you and who I can be with you, honestly, I haven't discovered yet. We're 2.5 minutes into our knowing one another. And I'm looking forward and curious as to who I can be when I'm with you, and who you can be when you're with me. And that's changing by the second right now.
That's right.
Because you asked a question that you had every anticipation would come back with a particular tone and a particular kind of information, and we've just left the script. So now, who can we be when we are together?
That's right.
Wow, that's wonderful. I was just curious, like who can we be? It first gives us time to pause and listen. For me, a sense of excitement, a sense of curiosity, and I do have a sense of silence, a spaciousness right now.
And for me, what's present right now is that we are fellow travelers, and that although we have not said much, we are connected.
And we don't know where we're going. And that's a particular way of traveling. If you've ever gone traveling with a friend or a family member, and they've been that person who needed to know every minute of where you were going every second, and then you've had that other experience of all the plans falling apart, and there you are traveling, and you actually don't know which hotel you're going to be at tonight. You don't know what plane you're going to take. You don't know if that train is coming or not. And suddenly things start to happen. And if you're in a state of freak out, if you panic, you miss the opening. I think that's such a great metaphor for actually where we are right now.
And I think that's a huge challenge because there's this part of me that I love just being like showing up without any plans.
Mhm.
But then sometimes I think that what's expected, right? That there's some structure, some guideline so that no one's time, your time is not wasted, or we are effective or efficient, that whole thing drives the conversation um,
And
versus perhaps, yeah, just being here. Mm.
isn't it interesting how those notions of optimization, of efficiency, of wasted time, of all of that is part and parcel of industrialism, colonialism, modernity? It's the very thing we're trying to move away from,
Mm.
right? In order to be in that emergent, complex understanding and perception and to practice um, to practice that is actually to recognize that that thing you just said, which is so beautifully articulated for all of us, right? I don't want to waste your time. I don't want anybody to be bored listening to this or think, why should I listen to her if she doesn't know what she's going to talk about? But I also hope that audiences and people have an increasing demand for exactly that kind of more ecological, alive movement,
Mm.
so that we can actually get out of the pattern of everybody just repeating the same professional lines that they've been repeating, which honestly, if you keep repeating the same thing, that is not how you make change.
Mm.
So it's very interesting to hold that tension. Um,
Yeah.
and I think, this gathering is about mastery.
Yes.
Um, and there's a sort of a strange and beautiful irony to the practice of mastering being in that realm of possibility. Now, please notice I didn't call it ambiguity or the unknown or emergence, right? I didn't use those words because those words are already going to tag you in to other scripts. So,
Yeah.
how do I practice being in relationship and conversation that helps to gently and maybe with humor and certainly with intellect and with rigor and with, I mean, it has to be in this moment a great deal of sorrow and fear, because if we don't feel those things right now, we're not actually able to sensitize to anything. But how to be in this type of conversation in a way that lets it move, where it's never gone before, where I'm saying things I've never said before. Because not that I haven't rehearsed, okay? So people often think with improvisation, for example, that improvisation is just some random stuff that you can
Mm.
just do willy-nilly. That
Yeah.
is absolutely not what improvisation is. In order to be in improvisation, you have to practice and practice and practice and practice so that you can be free.
Mm. Mm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I spent my whole life preparing to be in this moment, to know that we could move in multiple directions, and I'm ready.
Great.
That's
Well,
wonderful.
we don't have that distinction looking at life from that perspective, but we are ready to dance with you.
Good.
But I think that is actually a very important observation when we talked about mastery and improvisation. A lot of people use Picasso's work where they say, oh, he just splashed some paint on the wall. What they forget is he was 25 years, many, many decades mastering the art, right?
Mhm.
And when he threw paint or did what he did, it showed up a masterpiece. Not because he threw paint on the wall, but because of his masterfulness or mastery.
Mhm.
And today, I think that we don't give much credence to this because we're so in a hurry
Yeah.
and we tend to just want to get a dabble of everything and be smart or look smart or sound smart with everything. Yeah, so it's almost like a surface level conversation sometimes.
Here's another illustration of that. If I say to my kids, there's food in the fridge, just cook something up.
Mm.
Okay. Well, they're used to eating well because I love to cook. So they're not, there's not nothing there. But what there is decades of exploration and learning the nuance. What does that pepper have in sweetness? What is the texture of that skin on that pepper? What is the cooking time that keeps it crisp? The cooking time that lets it mush. There's what's happening with that cheese. What is it with this rice? What's happening with that type of cabbage? Not the same as the other type of cabbage or the other, or these potatoes, or this oil, or this heat. So what they don't have under their understanding of just find something in the fridge is years of exploring the way that this oil is with that heat or with these vegetables, or if you start with the protein. So that makes it seem like I can just go to the fridge and pull a few things and whip them up and it's great. And I'm cooking something that has no name and I've never cooked it before and I'll probably never cook it again, but it's not coming out of nothing.
Mm.
Right? There's deep learning, lifetime of learning under that. And so it's easy to not see that and to just see, oh, mom, what's the recipe for this dish? The recipe is 30 years of cooking,
Yes.
right? That's the recipe. But instead, they want to know it's a quarter cup of this or 2 grams of that, or they're looking for the wrong information.
Mm.
And this is an example, I think, of where so much of our whole society and looking for solutions to very urgent questions is actually arriving at that place of what's the recipe instead of what's in the 30 years of learning.
Mm.
And how do we allow that 30 years of learning not to produce what it's always produced, but to produce something different?
Mm.
Right? So it's that thing of instead of coming in with a model, here's how you make change in community or society, you're looking at what's in the multi-generational knowing and how it can actually go places it's never gone before.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I think that's very interesting. And for me, if you're ever going to ask what my work is, I would say it's that.
Wow. Multi-generational learning in a way that stood up because it's my 30 years of mastering something, right? And when you say now multi-generational, it's just not me anymore, right? You're kind of including the past, present, and ancestral, whatever, the whole world of it, past.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's where when I said my kids aren't really starting with nothing,
Yeah.
right? So it's interesting. If you have children, you will know that you can tell them 1,000 times to do a thing, and likely they won't do it. But there's all these things you never told them that they do all the time. This way that we teach our children implicitly, and the implicit lessons are these intergenerational lessons, right? The implicit lesson is that food is important. The implicit lesson is fascinating. My daughter, I think she came to me one day. She was maybe 16, 17 years old, 17. She said, Mom, why did you do this to us? What did I do? And she said, well, when I walk in the living room and I see the whole family in there, I think is everybody okay? Does anybody need a tea? Is everybody emotionally okay? Are they comfortable? Do they need a blanket? Is there who's sitting by them? How are they today? And when my brother goes in the room, he just sees the question of where should I sit? Why did you teach us to be this way? Okay, so I immediately got defensive and I was like, I didn't teach you to be this way. And I thought about it for 3/4 of a second and I thought, oh, I did. I did. Because that's what I do, right? I go in the room and I'm making sure everyone's all right, that the surfaces are clean, that the room's the right temperature, that people have what they need. And I may have been monitoring their various needs for months and years. So I'm watching through lots of storylines. My husband comes down. He's like, I'll sit in this chair. And this is this weird engendered transmission that has taken place. And how do we deal with that? I'm not going to ask, how do I teach my daughter not to do that? But what I'd like to ask is, how do I actually teach my son to do it? So that we are not all alone holding all of the nurturing, right? So I think it's wonderful that my daughter has developed the skills to walk into a room and perceive all that information, relational information. But it's something tragic that, and to be honest, my son has really gotten much better at it. And in fact, I would say he's definitely on the way. But now he's frustrated with his brothers or his friends because he feels that. So there's this thing, intergenerational, completely unspoken, indirect transmission. And that transmission is infinitely more potent than all the times in the world I could say to him, no, when you go in the living room, be sure you make sure that everybody's okay. Like, that's actually not going to do much. So how do you train someone in implicit shiftings? That's an interesting question, right? Where is that piece of parenting, of being a partner, of being a community worker or someone who's working for any kind of social systems or healing? Because it's so much is happening in that implicit space. You see why I'm excited. I really want to be working more in Asia.
Right.
Because there is a lot more practiced, nuanced, implicit work there.
If I can just share this, I have a 30-year-old daughter, and recently we've had our nephews live in our home, along with our 82-year-old mother, and Poorani and I are sisters. We've just come back from Singapore where we had a short holiday with all of them at home. And there was one afternoon, my daughter and I had seen her uncle. She said, would you like something for lunch? He said, no. And we proceeded to prepare our own lunch and we sat down and we started eating. And then my mother came and she just stood above us both, like, what are you doing? And we said, well, we're having something to eat. Would you like to join us? There's some extra. But she was obviously disapproving of whatever that we were doing. We then went off because we had a meeting and my daughter was going, I can't believe this. And I had not said a single word. My mother had not said a single word. Why is grandma so upset that we didn't make lunch for everyone? And subsequently, my mother and I had a run-in and she said, why didn't you do that? I said, well, I offered. 2 others were going to eat later and my brother had said no. But it was like, you're meant to cook for everyone. You can't eat on your own. And my daughter is listening to this and she's going, that's so sexist.
Right.
Grandma, how can you expect that? And I get it. So I turned to my daughter when grandma was not around and I said, I'm not like that, Isha. I told her that. And she said, she was sort of half convinced because she watches me although I'm not demanding that of her like the way my mother does, right? So I'm complicit in it.
And your mother doesn't have to be demanding with you because you do it.
Exactly.
So, but now here's my question, because I think it's a beautiful notion. If you're going to make food, don't make it just for yourself. Absolutely with that. It's
Right.
just that it needs to not just be the women. It needs to be the family, the household, the grouping, whatever it is, we're in this together. And certainly there's gendered rules, and this is where the intergenerational habits that I'm talking about. How do we take this knowing that is so old and allow it to move in new ways? Because there's nothing wrong with the beautiful ancient understanding of sharing a meal. I mean, it's so important. It's really not about being hungry. It's not about nutrients. It's not about what time of day it is. It's about being human and being alive together. And the conversation and the table and the culture and the courtesy and the love that is expressed, the healing that's expressed through that. So the food is not the food. It certainly isn't the recipe. It also isn't what's on your plate. Right?
Yeah.
So it's so important because I love food as an example of this too, because it really um, it exists in this very practical way where
Yeah.
we could talk all sorts of societal change models. We could talk about environmental um, models to get the particulate out of the atmosphere. We could talk about, dealing with all kinds of issues of capitalism and so on. At some point, we're also just talking about how people who live together have a meal. And inevitably, all of the ideas and the assumptions and the habits and the possibilities of these much bigger global systems changes are right there in what happens at that table and what happens in the preparing of the meal and what happens when the multiple. I love that you use the description of 3 generations. My mother was living with us for a couple of years before she died, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to see the way the generations were reflecting off each other, these differences in assumptions, and what the deep benefits were of each generation's contribution to the conversation. Your daughter's so right, and your mother is so right that neither of them are wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and this is why we need multi-generational learning. This is why these sort of moments they're so precious and a little uncomfortable. We're working on a project with family businesses right now. And this would be really interesting to bring to Asia, I think, because most of the world's businesses are family businesses.
Right.
And in family business, you have the complexity, woohoo, of all the things. It's economic, it's cultural, it's historical, it's psychological. It's when a business is being transferred across generations, it has to change to stay viable in a changing world, but it has to stay the same to because the older generations don't want to see it change because then they'll see it lose its integrity and
Yes.
the work that they did can't be for nothing. But if it doesn't change, it dies. Um, and so then you get this idea that the transfer is some sort of economic or asset transfer, but most of what's actually possible is intangible. What can you do if the family hates each other, if the siblings don't speak to each other, if there's a new step parent who comes in and their child wants to take over? Like there's the things that can go wrong in family business
That's
are
right.
rich with these relational issues. And also with possibility, because there's a way in which when I'm looking at especially the business world, um, if the business is run by a fairly sterile and disconnected group of board of directors and some bylaws and protocols, it's actually beholden completely to the existing systems,
Mm.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
But family business can pivot. Families can make their decisions to make change in a way that businesses that are abstracted corporate entities cannot, because there's actually no one with a grandchild in the room that is
Mm.
responsible. There's no one imagining what will this production, whatever it is we're doing,
Yeah,
what will it do to the life of my great grandchild? And that's really important. There's room in that particular configuration for all sorts of interesting shiftings. Yeah.
Yes.
for sure.
Poorani and I are obviously very excited to hear this last part because 80% of our work is with family businesses.
Oh, let's get together on this.
Yes.
This is our entry point. Fantastic. This is what I'm seeing, okay, is that if you go at these problems head on,
Yes.
they get worse.
Exactly. And what you observed is exactly what we observed too, right? Because they have the emotional connection. I mean, they have the connections beyond the shareholders, beyond the ROIs and the profitability, right? And so they can make the kind of choices and decisions that your professionals cannot and will not make. And they are, in a way, the transformers or the system change agents, the highest leverage. So we have, for the last 10 years, focusing primarily on family businesses, the owners, the next generation transition, as you said, really supporting through that conversation for handover and resolving the very deep conflicts that allow for handover to be effective, allow family to flourish first. When they get that, then they can make those kind of um, choices around their business. And like you said, what world are you leaving behind for your grandchildren or your great grandchildren? Because they get that.
So I use the warm data lab process and the warm data theory, and we do like a several day retreat with multiple family businesses. So they can sort of see through each other's stories, because it's very difficult to see through your own, because you know who's wrong and who's right, right?
Right.
Well, but you
Yeah,
don't.
yeah,
So so seeing through other people's stories has been really, really great. But one of the things that we have noticed is that things move. When I say things, what I'm referring to is those ways in which some previous harm has
Mm.
taken place. Um, but we've forgotten the details because it was several generations ago. We don't know what harm took place, but some harm took place. And around the way in which that harm took place, there's all sorts of defense mechanisms that have grown and habits that get transferred from that defense mechanism place.
Mm,
And
mm,
so people don't even know what they're defending,
right.
but they will defend it to the bone, to the through their blood, they will defend. And so those things are difficult to loosen,
Yeah.
especially if you go head on, because no one actually knows what it is. So you can ask people, how do you feel? And it actually, that information isn't even relevant because it isn't even their feelings. It's something from generations ago that they don't know where it came from. So the warm data lab work has been fascinating in creating the particular conditions in which there's not necessarily the yanking out of the information and here it is, but the subtle movement of it where it just shifts.
Mm,
So we kind of went beyond that place of thinking we need to name the problem so we can solve it. That's a very industrial version. of how things change, especially in this space, right? So you don't have to pull it out and name it and solve it. You need to give it room to shift where it is, which is in some sort of blurry, underground, intergenerational, no one knows what's going on soup. So how do you get that soup to shift?
Mm.
And to do it in ways that don't make someone wrong, right? That allow for the dignity and the integrity of intergenerational learning, which is not just the young learning from the old, it's the old learning from the young simultaneously. And but the dignity is super important because if
Yeah.
you look in the past, I mean, there was a lot of wisdom, and also we got here to this place where most of our ecological and cultural, societal, economic systems are now fatal to the next
Mm.
generations. So
Mm.
we can look back with love and with honor, and we can also say, it's got to change now without having that be wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, but now we're back at the improvisation question of that thing of we need something new, so we're just going to grab this model and stick it on because it's urgent, times are urgent, and we need to allow these old knowings to reconfigure themselves
Mm.
without carrying on a perpetuating illusion,
Yeah.
right? And that's a tricky, tricky business.
Yeah. So the work that you do and in this space of mastery and intergenerational wisdom, how do we find the common ground? Like, what is that access? So, I mean, not like a solution or an answer, but is there such a thing as a common ground? I mean, does something have to give?
Okay, so the response that I'm going to give to this, if it's not coherent to you, keep asking, okay? Because I'm going to try to describe what I have learned. Um, and I think it will touch your understandings. There's shades of Taoism in here, but it's not Taoism I'm talking about. I'm not into the cultural appropriation of Westerners getting into that. Um, but here's what I have observed, okay, with especially with the warm data lab processes, is there is something that you could call a common ground. I would rather call it a common field or a common realm.
Mm.
All right. And what happens in that common realm in the warm data work is that there are multiple stories told from multiple contexts that appear to have absolutely no correlation with each other.
Mm.
Okay, that's really important because the fact of them appearing to not have a correlation allows for the very human instinct, which is more than human, it's a very alive instinct. If you are a living organism, you will seek relational information. So you get all these stories that appear to not correlate, but because you're alive, you start to correlate them. You find the connections, you find the overlaps, you find the patterns. You, without knowing you're doing it, someone tells a story, and while they're telling a story about their lives, 1,000 things are lighting up in your head. Okay? I'm not interested in the story. I'm interested in those 1,000 things that just lit up. And what happens when the next person tells a story and another 1,000 things light up and you haven't spoken to them, you haven't, really consciously processed them, you haven't named them, labeled them, listed them, you haven't done any of that. They're just swooshing around, but they're lit. And when you get multiple experiences of that, you get multiple of your own stories that are all lit up at the same time that start to mix in new ways. That mixing is the field that I'm talking about. And so in that mixing, people perceive things they didn't even know they were confused about. Right? So if you go in saying, and now we're going to straighten out this one confusion that you have, that's not interesting because everyone in the room has a particular kind of readying for a particular type of combining and new insight that can come through. And you don't know what that is, and neither do they. So there's no point in turning that into a goal-oriented process. But what I have seen again and again is that in that, there's movement way beyond what we would call compromise. It's not compromise. It's actually a simultaneous insight into some totally different direction that you don't have to, work on the disentangling or the unraveling or the fixing of a problem. Something occurs and the whole group moves in a new way that you didn't even know was going to happen. And so it can happen quite quickly. In fact, it does. I mean, 3-4 days, we're seeing enormous changes. Enormous. And also with people who aren't even in the room. So things that are shifting, if I shift how I am in a relationship with you, and you shift how you're in a relationship with her, and pretty soon all these relationships are moving, things are happening with people who aren't here.
Yes.
And that's interesting. So was that coherent at all for you?
Yes, it was coherent for me. I had one question in the sense that I'm wearing a consultant hat, listening to what you're sharing, and I'm already thinking about a few clients,
Yeah.
right? And where they're stuck. And I'm wondering to myself, when you have people who have very strong views about their past and what is going to happen in the future, and then they go through this warm data lab process, do you have to prepare them to be open, or they just do whatever they do normally and something shifts?
Yeah. And I'll tell you what the golden sauce is there's no agenda. So they don't have to position. There's no agenda. No one's there to make them wrong or right. There's no way to, like I said, what's interesting is not the story. It's the 1,000 things that get lit up and the way those impressions shift other impressions that were, if you had a recording of the session, they would be nowhere on the transcript. So it doesn't matter. I mean, if somebody's like really in their mode, they could hold on to that for a minute, but it will dissipate like very quickly because it's not about here are the situations we need to solve, right? It's not about that. It's just the question might be something totally different. So one of the questions we would use in a warm data lab, for example, might be, well, what about this? What is food in a changing world? So they're talking about food, and they think that they're talking about something that's, as long as they don't have a restaurant business, they think they're talking about dinner and food and life, and just like these things are not the things that they have tracked as relevant issues to the agenda that is getting assessed. Right? They're in some underground space, but all the stuff is there that's in this other place. So it moves here, and then that other space just gets shifted. And no one has to be wrong. No one has to acquiesce. No one has to capitulate. No one has to compromise. there's a different mutual learning where it's like, oh, I didn't see that before. I mean, what warm data is known as is a trans contextual process, right? So these contexts inform each other. The family informs the economy, informs the school system, informs the health system, informs all these systems inform each other. And so you can't just pick one out and fix it. So
Yeah.
we can say, oh, there's real health problems in this family. Probably the health problems have nothing to do with doctors. They have to do with a whole way of being, of living, of thinking about money, of being in identity with each other, of thinking about school, of what is success. Okay, that's another one of our questions. What is success? What is risk?
Right.
And these are questions that are tested and tested way before we use them. But
Yeah.
so that urgency, I mean, I have never once had a warm data lab where I had to, ahead of time, inform people of what was appropriate behavior. I
Mm.
never say you need to be respectful. It's unnecessary.
Mm.
It's built into the process itself. And occasionally you get someone who's just like really determined to be a jerk. But even for them, it wears off pretty quickly because it doesn't go anywhere.
Mm.
No, there's no thing you can push into a certain position of win, lose. There's no zero sum. It's a
Mm.
complexity that's moving transcontextually. And in that, all of those little things that actually talk about how do you make a decision? What makes a decision? Well, I've assessed what's good and bad about the situation. Have you, though? And where did the ideas of that assessment come from? Are they cultural? Are they economic? Are they personal? Is it because you once got bullied? Is it because you once were a bully? Is it because you've been loved? Is it because you're old? Is it because you're young? Is it because, like,
Mm.
so this idea of like, we're going to make some new decisions based on the new information. Nah. You know, the soup in which the possibility of even what can be perceived as possibility. Right? So that's what's so exciting is when possibilities emerge that no one thought about
Mm.
because they were looking through a different set of lenses, and through those set of lenses there were only three options. Well, there's really only two things we could do. We could do this or we could do that. And then it's like, oh, actually there's another whole world of possibility. And then you're not bickering about whether you're going to do this or do that.
Mm. Yeah. That's just amazing.
The training
Well,
course.
in the family, so is it three
I
days?
in the families I do 3 or 4 days.
Oh,
They
okay,
don't
fine.
need to go through the whole training
All
system.
right.
They need some theory and some practice. They need some new ideas to play with, and they just need to be doing warm beta labs with each other and having different businesses there.
Mm.
So some businesses that are big money, some businesses that are not big money, some
Mm.
businesses that are producing a thing, businesses that are doing more, whatever, something that you might not be able to hold. Some people that are in service, some people that are in tech, whatever. But to be able to perceive their own experience through somebody else's story.
Mm.
And to have those gears and those, it's like there's a soil of
Mm.
cognition that is not just yours. It is intergenerational. And to have that soil go from being very acid to very
Mm.
alkaline.
Mm.
And it gets acid when there's not enough other stories in it. Just like the soil, it's lacking in ecology.
Right.
Right.
Mm.
So if you
Yeah.
only got one story, you're going to
Mm.
be in a very limited sense of
Mm,
of
mm,
of
yeah.
fertility of possibility, right?
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. That's so wonderful to hear. A lot of the things that we see happening in the world, because there have been very strong narratives or stories that have been carried through decades and generations, and it's just like this one overarching main story, right? And all other stories have no place or disappear or cannot be heard. The question I had as you were explaining this or speaking about this was that what does it take um, to just sit there, at least in the beginning, and listen, right? Just to even allow the soil to fertilize or to turn, right? What does it take? What does it take for that person sitting in
Mhm.
that room with dozens of other people to listen?
Well, this is where you have to be a trained host,
Ah, right.
because it's the difference between opening the fridge and just seeing stuff and opening the fridge and seeing some stuff.
Yeah.
Because the host of the room has to create the conditions in which that type of listening
Mm,
is an implicit understanding that is shared. If you say, now everybody, we're going to listen very carefully to each other's stories, immediately you ruined it, right? You killed it.
yeah.
So you can't say that directly. So what
Mm,
do you
mm,
do? What do you
mm.
do if you have a room full? Okay, so I have a lab coming up in China that is going to
Ah,
have 1,000 people in it.
wow.
Wow.
How do you hold 1,000 people in that moment of, and now we're going to listen to each other without telling them, and now we're going to listen to each other. But this is an art form,
Mm,
and it's not anything you say. It's some way that you're holding this in your body, in your
mm,
spine, in your voice, in your breath, in your way of knowing. And this is the hard part, in your way of knowing that even though I have no idea what's going to happen with those 1,000 people, who's going to say what to whom, I know that they will tell stories and that
mm.
their stories will change each other's stories. I know that. I know that. And
Yes.
and that knowing takes practice.
So let me go back to the origin. How did you discover this? How did you come
Oh,
up with this process?
okay, the origin. Um, okay, so my father was quite
Right.
seminal in the whole beginning of cybernetics and systems thinking, and I grew up in a household in which he was old. He was 64 when I was born. So he had already lived through so much of his various attempts of making change.
Mm, mm,
And he was at the beginning of family therapy. He was at the beginning of information science. He was at the beginning of a lot of the ecological things. He was at the beginning of many anthropological studies of how cultures think differently
mm,
and live differently and are different. And what does it mean to be a human being, right? So by the time I was born, he implicitly brought me into a world in which that type of attention, that type of sensitivity was important in our home,
mm,
right? It's not what someone said, it's what the context was. It's what was in the relationships that produced the possibility for them to say that. It's not what someone did. It's what's in the context. It's what's in the relationships around them. It's what your reaction, it's what your context is that makes you right. So from a very, very young age, from zero,
mm,
didn't know that I was actually learning to be in the world in that way.
Mm.
Okay, so then I started to grow up and I went through college and like everything was frustrating. Like, how come everybody's trying to break everything in parts and fix the parts? Like, why is everyone doing this? And and then I began to try to explain, and I couldn't explain. And
Mm.
I realized I couldn't explain because I wasn't about psychology. It wasn't about ecology. It wasn't about education. It wasn't about economy. And so where was it? Well, it's in the way all these things are shifting each other. It's in the way they're forming each other, right? The education system is formed by the economy, the history, the family, the culture, the right? The health
Yeah.
system, the idea of success, identity. So you can't just change the education system. What's wrong with the education system? We have to find a solution. It's like, well, it's not really there, is it?
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
I realized I needed to create something that would allow these different contexts to be perceived. Okay, that's the key word, to be perceived in different kinds of relationship. I couldn't go in and change the system, politics, economy. I couldn't change those entities because every time you change them, the other contexts suck them back into the
Mm.
same stuckness.
Mm.
So, how do we tend, massage, open, enliven the way that they're in relationship with each other and not get colonial about it? Right? So it'd be super easy to be like, well, I know what's best. This is the
Yeah.
type of relationship these institutions should have with each other. But that humility i- that's needed for these relationships to change is the exact opposite of that conviction.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
So I tried to make a space where these people who are, we are the system, right? I am the economy. I am the culture. I am the health system. I am the family. I am, right? I am. Those things that I'm talking about are basically just buildings.
Yeah.
We are the actual transmitters of them.
Mm.
So the shift is with us. And it's
Mm.
not just at a super verbal, cognitive, descriptive level.
Yeah.
It's down in the deep down, right? You can't tell someone, don't be racist. You can't tell them you have to love each other because the deep down, they can change their vocabulary, but they haven't changed their
Yeah.
right. So so that was where it came from, was recognizing that there's a way in which all these different contexts are changing each other and that that change takes place in the most intimate stories of our lives, not in the big global
Mm.
statistics, but in our most intimate decisions. What's for
Mm.
breakfast? How do you tell your child not to do a thing? How do you teach your child to do dishes? Right? These are the places where all of our systemic chaos, polarization, belief systems, wars, they're all right here.
Mm.
So, how do we actually create a place where these things can move and heal? There's a strange type of healing. Um,
Mm.
and that's where it came from. But it's
Mm.
wild, you see. And for most people, they're going to see it and they're going to say, yeah, but what is the outcome? What's the deliverable? How do we measure it?
Yeah.
And those are the wrong questions. Those are the questions that come from industrialism. Those are not the questions of systemic work.
Mm.
If you're working with a living system, you will never know. You will never know where the end of the changes that change, that change, that change, that changes, that
Exactly.
changes, that change, that changes, that change, that changes. They don't end. So it's
Mm.
the wrong question.
That's
But that's irritating for people who are looking for a particular outcome. That's my cross to bear. That's my burden. I have to just sit here and be like, oh, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Forgive me, love me anyway. But there will be no binder full of outcome information reports on this.
Mm,
But
And
then
you,
that great
wonderful.
question, right? How did you be true to purpose of what was created and to
Mhm.
hold the faith?
Well, that is okay. That is an intergenerational thing.
Mm.
All right. So my grandfather was actually working with he coined the term genetics, and he was
Mm,
working studying how organisms change, and the whole world of science, because he was a scientist, wanted him to study particular individual organisms and chart their change. And he, at the turn of the century in the 1800s, started to say, no, it's the change isn't in the organism, it's in the context. You can't just study one, or that's individualism. That's the industrialism, right? So he was pushing back then on this very idea, and he did not sell out. The King of
mm,
England offered him knighthood. He turned it down because he knew they were going to take these ideas and implement them in ways that were dangerous. He left the Royal Society. He lived a life where he took a lot of pain to not compromise the integrity of what he saw was life itself. Life itself, right? An affection and a care for how life makes life. And he wouldn't back down from it. And then my dad came along, and also he wrote books that nobody understands because he refused to put them in language that was easily shifted into industrial programs of implementation.
Right.
mm,
Because he
mm,
was afraid if you take this wrong, what you'll do is turn it right back into some sort of, how do we change the system mentality that is going to be instrumentalized, that's going to be contaminated completely with all the bad ideas of colonialism and modernity. And
mm,
and what those bad ideas are is control. Right? So he would not bend. He never took tenure. Universities all over the world tried to offer him a permanent position in a department. He never would take it. He never bent
Mm.
from his dedication and advocacy for life itself. Whether that was in a family, working with people who had, drug or alcohol addictions, working with an ecosystem, working with a society, looking at culture, he would not bend to the point of any type of justification for manipulating the system, right? Don't manipulate life.
Yeah.
Don't manipulate it. Make room for it to shift, but don't think you know best. And so that was the home that I grew up in. So believe me, there have been moments when I would have actually, made a lot more money and my life would have been a hell of a lot easier if I had just gone along with the program a little bit. But but I couldn't.
Yes.
yeah.
I couldn't because I have these ancestors breathing
Mm,
down my neck saying, we didn't sell out and you better not sell out either. If you're going to carry this intergenerational work, you better hold it with all the integrity. So, even showing up for this podcast right now,
Right.
there's a part of me that is always going to be a little bit afraid of myself.
Mm.
You know, I have to be careful never to get caught in the web and the momentum and the excitement of the promise of some sort of um, beautiful change that's
Yes.
produced through linear
Thinking.
yeah.
processes. And
Yeah.
and the outcome is going to be so great and we can see it from here. No, you cannot. No, you cannot.
Mm.
Mm,
And so I have to, in some ways, really keep my ghosts close. Here we go. Back to the beginning. I wouldn't want to waste your time.
But what you said is so profound and insightful. A lot of the stories that we tell the next generation and the stories that are passed on always have a certain context.
Mm.
And
I
you can see the common context, moving from one generation to another. And when you shared your story of someone who is preserving and not selling out, right? Or it could be someone who had the experience of being taken advantage of and passing on that fear.
Yeah.
So this
Be a-
contradiction, because you've got the people who are strong and willing to fight for it, and then there are the others who are worried and fearful in the same family,
Mhm.
influencing each other. Then which context is going to prevail?
And I would say neither.
Yeah.
Neither.
Mm.
There's something else possible. And this is the beauty of working transcontextually, is that if you try to solve a problem in the context you think it is, you inevitably make it stronger.
Mm.
So it's when you get these multiple contexts side by siding, then things come loose and you're not looking at that binary anymore. And the problem is not the problem. You just got to shift the whole thing. But this is not the way we have been trained. We have been trained to identify the issue, to find out what's relevant to the client, and to address the issues that are relevant. And if you start off by saying, okay, so I'm actually not interested in any of that. Because I think that these things are actually living somewhere else. So let's do some other things.
Mm.
And some clients will walk, and other clients will be so relieved. And a lot of them will just be confused, right? Let me know if I'm incoherent. And and that's something it's taken me 57 years to learn to say first.
Yeah.
Right? Let me know. Yeah. What makes us do what we do?
Yeah.
What makes us, by the time we've said what we've said or enacted something, there's been generations of informing.
It's curious what you're saying, right? If I recollect my own journey, it was important to know who am I, right? And I thought that handled everything. But really, what remains, even if you know who am I, is what makes me do what I do.
Mm.
And that's that journey, if I was to, tell the truth about it.
Yeah.
What I knew yesterday or day before, what I know today about that right? So I think it's an exciting way to live, and thank you for sharing this. But I want to ask another question. What's collective consciousness?
I mean, I think we've been talking about that for the
I
last
think so.
hour.
I think so. Yeah, in terms of,
But
but there was no answer, right? It's just allowing us to be.
and that's why I would never call it collective consciousness.
Mm, mm,
Because I think it's something more immediate and deeply intimate. I think for me, that's been one of the biggest learnings from the warm data work that I have. I continue to be surprised by is how absolutely minuscule and intimate the experience of life is that holds those shared experiences.
Mm.
And the way in which you don't see them because they're the water you're swimming in. You don't pay
Yeah.
attention, you don't know that you're doing the thing, right? My daughter's saying, "Why'd you teach us to be like this?" And I had no idea I had done that. So
Yeah.
you don't know you're doing it. And that's the stuff where the real systems change, the deeper complexity of what's happening is really living. And it's also the place that is very confrontational to all the ideals of modernity and colonialism. So it's a very interesting place to work, because to express something authorized, something credible, something sellable, something that is viable in the existing set of demands is, I think, almost impossible to do the actual deep systemic ecological work. You know, that question, right? Not who am I, but who am I when I'm with you? What decisions have we in our own immediacy made in this hour for the direction of this conversation? Where did they come from? What happened in this little trio of women that could never happen anywhere else on a different day? And I would say quite a bit, right? Because this is a very different interview than I've done before. And I'm pretty sure it's a very different interview than you've done before.
For sure.
So what happened? Did we just decide something? Did we chart it? Did we plan it? Did we have some sort of a strategy or a committee? Exactly not.
Yeah.
And that for me is what is the shared realm of living possibility. And it can be hijacked, obscured, and destroyed all
Yes.
too easily. And in this moment, I don't feel that there's any more time to be destroying possibility.
Yeah. Wow, it's just so wonderful. I mean, it so resonates, it so captures what we are up to. And so we're just so glad to have had this conversation with you. Really. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And let's get together. I can't wait.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
definitely. Definitely. Oh my gosh, I wish I could be a fly on the wall with 1,000 people in China
When is that happening?
In
after.
October.
Wow, that would have been after our conference. I mean, if that had happened,
That's
yeah.
right. So that was the
Right?
idea. I'm going to Asia. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
It all
Wow, that would have been
happened.
exhausting though.
So the more people you bring, the more people you have in a kind of community that can hold, because you can't hold this alone. I mean, maybe you can, but I needed my like ancestors, and I needed ghosts to help me.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
um, it's hard to hold it alone, and it's more fun to do it together.
Yeah.
So I think, I'd love to see that. And then I think we should set something up for an in-person Asian training. One of the things that I do with the warm data training is I offer anybody who wants to take it again can take it for free after they've taken it once. And there's most of the hosts that are really, deeply involved. They've been through the course maybe 9 times.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's because it's dense. It's a lot of theory, but it's a lot of practice and a lot of, because this is a big epistemological shift.
Yeah.
And the epistemological shift is not just in your brain, it's in your body, it's in your stories. And so it takes time. And the in-person course is a week long, which
Yes,
is,
that was good.
all day, every day. And
Right.
the online course is 3 weeks long.
Oh,
Every day.
But it's 3 hours a day.
okay.
Yeah, because it's not good for the body to be online too long.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but both are good, and they complement each other. And
Nice.
so let's do it.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
let's do it.
it
Wonderful.
was
But
such a pleasure to meet you.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
to
been
you too.
ours
And
too.
yeah, well, thank you, Nora. And I want to acknowledge the presence of your ancestors, your father Gregory Bateson and your grandfather William Bateson. So, they were all here in this conversation, but thank you very much for bringing them.
And your ancestors are here too. I don't know their names, but they're here too. It's never just us.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Thank you. Anything else, Dr. Ramesh?
This has been a wonderful conversation. So thank you for being here and generating it the way you do it, which is true to yourself,
Mm.
and giving us the opportunity to experience it.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
thank you for letting me be with you in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
All right, we'll keep in touch.
Okay.
Thank you, Nora. Bye bye. Have a great
Bye.
day. Bye.